Something I think everyone should always keep in mind in today's landscape of making music is if you're the guy who's mixing a beat track and a bunch of vocals together, don't let the beat track hold back this product. A lot of times, the beat track is not recorded with the vocal that's going to be used on it in mind. They're often totally different people. You got one guy creating the vocal melody, and he's downloaded a beat track to work on. That beat track could have synth lines, piano, keys, guitars, violins, horns. It could have all sorts of stuff all jumbled on top of itself where maybe a vocal is sitting so that all that stuff, maybe some of the stuff I just mentioned, one element, two elements are stepping on the vocal. And a lot of times the guys that want to mix their stuff, like they get a beat track, they download it, they do all these great vocal tracks, and then they try to put it together. In my opinion, you need to get the stems because it's so much easier to be able to separate out the things that are in the way and change them around. You may want to just pitch shift the violins to make them fit the key you're singing a melody in, for example. Or you have your hook line, you created a vocal hook. Well, you could have some lines that are clashing or just creating a part that's too busy. So getting all the stems, the pieces of the beat track make a difference. If you can get every multi-track file within the beat, that's the best. If you can get stereo mixes, which is what a stem means, STEM, stereo mix, that's what it stands for, of the keyboards on one wave file that's a stereo wave file of all keyboards, that would be the keyboard stem. If you can get that, the piano stem, the the guitar stem, the acoustic stem, if you get all these things broken out, that's your second best option. And your third option, and this is what a lot of people have to do today who don't have the luxury of getting all the pieces, because sometimes you'll get a beat track and then the guy who made it, he lost all the files, or, it happens way more often than you realize. You just can't get it. So what I do in that case is I break up that beat track always before I start. If somebody sends me, and this happens all the time, they'll send me a vocal, a bunch of leads, doubles, ad libs, whatever, and they also send a two-track, right? Just the beat track. I always do the same thing. I break off first. If there's no vocals on that thing, I can basically start after the first step. But if there's like a hook vocal in it, sometimes there'll be, some like canned, either a tag or like some weird stuff hook-wise in there, and I might want to get that off it to start with, so I always do instrumental and then vocals to separate any tags or anything like that off of the thing itself, the beat track. Then I go drums by itself, which then I can break out bass by itself from what's left over after the drums are gone. And what that gives me then is bass by itself, drums by itself, any sort of tags and stuff by itself, and then everything else by itself, which is usually all mid-range instruments, guitars, horns, whatever. That's the simplest way I break stuff down, because that will allow me to, when I'm mixing now, if I want to, just pitch shift everything that's like a mid-range instrument, not drums and not bass, well, I can do it. If I want to chop that stuff up or rearrange the part, you could do this stuff so easily today with our DAWs. Like, I've changed melodies before just by highlighting a part that I say, like, I hear the melody in my head that I want. Oh, it'd be cooler if it did this because that's what the vocal's doing. So let me try to mimic it, or this is a good counter to that. So I just copy and paste what I want and paste it in the places I want, all from just the mid-range track, which for me is everything except bass, drums, and any tags and stuff. It's its own track. So I basically don't let the beat track ruin what could be great by always separating it out before you start. And with programs today like lalal.ai, that's the one I use. It's not sponsored or anything. It's just the one I use because it's so easy. But if you have Ozone, they have their own RX software and everything that will do the same kind of thing. And the technology for that stuff's getting better all the time. Just by splitting out the stuff, I can then make the bass more powerful, and I can make the drums work with it instead of maybe however they mixed it together. Because a lot of times you're getting a mix of a track, not from Serban. It's not a beat track that Serban made. It's some beat track that some guy made in a place that might not be as good as you could put a beat track together. So just knowing that when you separate the stuff out, sometimes once you put it back together in a way that makes more sense to you, maybe use some parallel compression on something, maybe the mid-range track, you kind of use some sort of saturation thing that gives it more life or makes it sound more old school. I mean, you could do anything with it, right? At the end of that, the sum of that, of all those parts, is often greater than the beat track they sent you in the beginning. It's not always where no matter what you do, it's not equal. It's usually better. And because you can do those things that I'm talking about by chopping up what you have, you could change the bass line, you could change the drums. I can't tell you how often changing the drums allows you to do things like create a fill in a moment that didn't have one. Because so many times the beat track's just the same thing for 8 bars, or I mean, it never changes. And when we listen to it and there's a vocal on it, it may crescendo and build to something. And now it'd be cool if the drums cut out and then came in with a fill. Well, all you got to do is find the parts that you want, paste a few different snare drums around from the actual track, change it, copy and paste some hi-hats from a spot that was different, put it in however you want and really experiment. When I do that kind of thing, the last thing I do is like, ooh, I wonder if it's going to be good or bad. You just try stuff. A lot of times I'll duplicate the track so that right below it, I can basically have a spot where I can chop up whatever I want, and I could always just go back to the other one if I wanted to, but I'm trying things, all sorts of things. Might be adding delay, might be adding saturation, might be adding distortion, might be adding, I mean, literally anything, flipping it in reverse, whatever I can come up with to create cooler moments. And that stuff will take your song at the end and make it sound like the vocals that you added to it were meant for it instead of just sort of an afterthought on top of a beat track that was never meant to be with that thing to start with. Because that's the thing I think so many people, it's like the guy who thinks about the vocals. If he knew how to do that stuff, he might do it. But because he probably doesn't have the skill level of somebody who knows how to do all these things with manipulation, you as a mixer can really take that stuff to the next level. You really can. And they might not ever have the ideas that you have, especially if you think about it from a musical point of view, like musicality. In other words, the words do this. Can I make the music match that? Can I create something that might work better than what's there? That might fit the notes he's hitting better. You could do all kinds of stuff. So I find some people feel really boxed in when they get a 2-track, but they shouldn't, because with the tools we have today, we could do so much. And when you're going to add sound effects and this and that, it's really cool if you could do something like drop the bass line out and just have the drums play, put your sound effect in. That way you're creating kind of more space than was there, because that's another common huge problem all the time, is that a lot of times the arrangements of tracks are too dense that the listener can't really follow it and absorb it. There's just too much going on. So if you separate the stuff, you can change the way it feels in moments that you need to create a bigger result at the end. Because the more stuff you add, it doesn't make the end product bigger, greater, sound, huge. It doesn't. All it does is make it more cluttered and make it harder for the listener to really follow what's going on. That's why the best songs there are, the arrangements are well thought out and sparse. They're not super dense with tons of stuff in it. And I've been guilty of this too. Through time, as you create songs, you make the same mistakes you'll find that a lot of people make in the beginning. A lot of people don't realize until they've made stuff that's way too dense that it sounds better and it's easier to follow and it just makes more sense. It puts more emphasis on the lead vocal, which should be the star of the show, when you don't make stuff so dense and overcomplicated and so many parts tying into themselves and layer and layer and layer and layer, so many layers for no reason. So you guys got this. Any questions, answers, throw them in the comments. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. More tips to come. Evan Jaffe Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.